"Who do you think you are, filming the police?" That's what he screamed, right into the face of a black girl in a library in broad daylight. He was a cop. He drew his gun. He pressed it against her forehead without asking a single question. He saw the headphones, saw the camera, saw the hoodie, and instantly imagined a threat. But he didn't know that the girl wasn't just live streaming. She had written an AI powerful enough to expose the entire system. When justice falls asleep, code wakes up in its place. Where you live? Who's holding the gun that enforces the law? The air inside the Crowley Community Library was unnaturally still, the kind of silence thick enough to muffle intention. Fluorescent lights flickered without apology over long aisles of worn-out encyclopedias and outdated history textbooks. There were whispers of movement. Pages turned, chairs adjusted, but they vanished as quickly as they rose. Amid the subtle rhythm of a place built for quiet knowledge, a shift was taking form near the rear window, unnoticed by most and unwelcome to some. Leah moved like someone trying not to exist. Her hoodie was pulled low, not in defiance, but in habit. Her noise-canceling headphones wrapped around her ears like armor, muting the world that never quite knew what to do with girls like her. She carried no sound as she set her tripod down, careful not to scrape metal against the tile floor. The camera lens stared forward blankly, a pupil unblinking, ready to record, but not to judge. She positioned it carefully near the faded "No Recording Allowed" sign, a printout yellowed by years of sunlight and neglect. Rules didn't scare her. She simply weighed them differently now. This was for her scholarship, not the kind granted out of pity, but the one that demanded brilliance, and proof of it. The assignment: create a demonstration of AI ethical boundaries using her original code. Talia had spent 3 months building Eva, her AI project. The presentation had to be flawless, compelling, and unforgettable, so she rehearsed aloud, her voice low but sure, even if she couldn't hear it herself through the hum of her headphone. "Subject threat confirmed. Lethal action authorized," she said. A simulation, nothing more. It was a line meant to mimic how legacy military AI might respond in flawed ethical configurations, a contrast to the system she had built, which would refuse such a directive. But in that frozen moment, what mattered wasn't what she meant, it was how it sounded. Sharp, mechanical, dangerous. The sentence hung in the air, cut cleanly from context, ready to be misunderstood. Across the aisle, a man paused, late 40s. White, dressed like he thought khakis were still professional. His name didn't matter, but his gaze did. Suspicion flickered instantly across his face like static. He took her in, hoodie, gear, mumbling what sounded like threat codes under her breath. To him, she didn't belong in this narrative. Not in this place, not like that. She looked like a disruption to the order he believed still protected people like him. He didn't confront her. That would require effort. But he did what felt just enough. He stepped outside, pulled out his phone, and dialed. "Yeah, 911? I think you've got a situation here," he said, not even glancing back. "Young woman. Maybe Arab or black, hard to say. She's got a camera set up at the Crowley Library, dressed in all black, hoodie up, talking to herself. Sounded like military stuff. Might be filming for some extremist thing. You'd better send someone, fast." He didn't see the lines he crossed, because in his mind, none existed. His words weren't slurs, but they cut deeper than most, a quiet assumption wrapped in patriotic anxiety, loaded with every broadcast headline he'd half listened to at dinner. His voice held the false calm of a man who thinks he's helping. Inside, Talia adjusted her lens slightly. She was in the zone now, lip-syncing her lines while monitoring Eva's behavior on her laptop. She didn't notice the shift in energy outside. She didn't hear the sirens flicker on blocks away, didn't see the way fear walks faster when it's wearing a badge. Her world was code, logic, safety in numbers, and syntax. But outside the library, something had already been set in motion. This was the kind of library that once meant sanctuary. Its bulletin board still offered free GED tutoring. Its children's corner smelled faintly of Play-Doh and Crayola, and the librarians wore cardigans and knew the regulars by name. But all it took was one misread sentence, one stranger's suspicion, for all that to shatter. In seconds, that space was no longer neutral. It was a trigger waiting to be pulled. The man who called had walked away satisfied, convinced he'd done his part to protect the peace. He didn't think twice about whether the girl had posed a threat. He didn't think twice at all. His concern wasn't with facts. It was with comfort. And Talia's presence, her gear, her tone, her skin, her hoodie, made him deeply, irrationally uncomfortable. Inside, Talia checked her playback. Crisp video, good lighting, she hadn't tripped on her words. EVA's response matrix was displayed on screen exactly as programmed. She mouthed the line again for a second take. Subject threat confirmed. Lethal action authorized. This time she added, simulation terminated right after, too late. In the distance, tires screeched. A door slammed. Boots struck pavement with urgency. Then silence returned long enough to feel unnatural. A moment holding its breath. The shot had been fired, not from a gun, but from a glance, from a sentence lifted out of context, from the quiet, subtle accusation that someone like her didn't belong in a building built for inquiry. A place meant for learning had just become the backdrop for suspicion. None of it made sense to her yet. She would only later piece together how a line of simulated AI protocol had sounded like a confession of intent, how a worn-out sign would be interpreted as defiance, how a hoodie and headphones, her normal, would be twisted into camouflage and silence. But for now, she was just a student recording a project, trying to earn a future, inside a library, under lights too bright, and eyes too dim, and someone, somewhere, already believed she was a threat. She didn't even know the call had already gone through. By the time Talia blinked twice, checking the brightness on her monitor, the man who had dialed 911 was already pacing outside, his breath forming short clouds in the air, his finger still hovering near the call screen like he expected applause. His voice, recorded on the dispatcher line, didn't rise. It didn't need to. Calm hate travels faster than panic. "Yeah, I'm at Crowley Community Library," he began, casual, like ordering coffee. "Look, I'm not trying to jump to conclusions here, but there's this girl, dark skin, full hoodie, got gear set up like she's about to stream something. She said something, 'I heard lethal action authorized,' sounded military. Look, I'm just saying, with everything going on, you never know. Better safe than sorry, right?" There was a pause, the kind that measured bias in seconds. Dispatcher log, 1412 EST, incident tagged, suspicious activity, possible domestic threat. Caller description, female, approximate, 1720, possibly of Middle Eastern or African American descent. Audio confirmed mention of lethal action. Location flagged as a low-risk community institution. Protocol escalation, level 2. Notification sent to the regional field response unit. The code blinked silently on screens across the precinct's watchroom, clean and sterile like a spreadsheet wrapped in Kevlar, but every keystroke carried weight. Race, age, clothing, language fragments, all compiled not to protect but to predict. On the sidewalk, the man smirked slightly as he hung up. He hadn't shouted, hadn't used slurs. He didn't need to. His phrasing was curated like a social media post. Plausible, void of emotion, dipped in concern. He wore the tone of someone performing civic duty. He sounded responsible, but his words were venom with a smile. Inside the library, the atmosphere remained deceptively still. Talia had no idea her image was now traveling through dispatch lines like a virus flagged for quarantine. She couldn't hear the machine that now quietly sought to categorize her under the architecture of suspicion. All she knew was code and clarity. She leaned slightly into the lens, adjusting for focus. Her line of thought stayed undisturbed, until it wasn't. At the front of the building, an older woman watched the man's behavior with quiet discomfort. Her name was Dolores, 72, white, local. She had worked in this very library for 2 decades before retirement. Now she came by most afternoons to read with the second graders. But she had seen that look before. The posture of concern masked the hunger for escalation. "She's just filming," Dolores said gently, stepping toward the man. "I heard her earlier. Something about a scholarship. That's what this is about?" He barely turned his head. "And what if it's not?" he replied, his voice sharp with unearned certainty. "Are you willing to bet on that?" "I'm willing to bet she deserves more than being profiled." "You should go sit down, ma'am," he snapped, his veneer of politeness fading. "Don't get yourself involved." Dolores didn't flinch, but the security guard at the lobby desk had overheard. Young, unsure, and undertrained, he approached with a forced smile and the stiffness of someone trying to assert control he didn't possess. "I'm going to have to ask you to let law enforcement handle this, ma'am," he said to her. "We don't want any interference." She blinked, stunned. "Interference?" He gestured toward the exit. For a moment, Dolores stood frozen. Then she sighed, nodded, and stepped outside. The man smirked again, 2 for 0. Inside, nothing had changed. Outside, everything was already done. Social media monitoring report. 14:23 EST. An anonymous student user on campus Wi-Fi posted a public status. "Something feels way off at Crowley Library. Cops pulling up, no sirens. Somebody's being set up. Watch this space." The post gained traction in seconds. Likes, retweets, DM. Analysis software flagged the message for a rapid engagement anomaly. Local moderators for the town's college subreddit pinned it to the top within 5 minutes. Screenshot attached. It's critical to note, no one at this point had proof. No one had seen a gun. No one had heard a scream. But systems move faster than truth. They don't ask if something's wrong. They ask if it looks like something they've been trained to fear. The dispatcher's report was forwarded again, this time appended with a yellow tag notation. Possibly filming extremist content. Subject identity unconfirmed. Recommend precautionary entry with high awareness. Do not engage unless the situation escalates. Yet escalation is subjective. The internal chatter at Dispatch District 4 turned sour within seconds. One agent muttered, "Could be another manifesto thing. Library, laptop, sounds familiar." Another, sipping lukewarm coffee, replied without looking up, "Classic setup. Black hoodie, camera, cryptic phrases. Yeah, that fits." They didn't need more. Protocol review snapshot. Internal email chain. Subject may fall under emergent parameters consistent with radicalization templates used in 2022 predictive models. Location is civilian-heavy but controllable. Recommendation: proceed with 2-officer entry, prepare containment protocols if necessary. Somewhere across town, the call reached a field unit. Sirens stayed off. Doors were slammed harder than needed. Body cams flickered red before blinking out. And still, Talia sat in a bubble of silence. She was alone, but not by choice. Alone because the world had decided girls who looked like her had to be doubted before they could be understood. To the system surveilling her, she wasn't a student. She was a silhouette, with variables, age, hue, and hardware. To the man who dialed in her fate, she was a problem to be solved, not a life to be listened to. And to the institutions responding, she was a possible threat until proven irrelevant. In the language of cold suspicion, irrelevance is safer than innocence. Because innocence suggests someone was wrong. Irrelevance means they can move on without apology. The security feed from the library's corner camera would later show it all. The subtle approach of shadows beyond the glass doors. The man whispering on his phone while pointing. The moment Dolores was escorted out like a liability. A still frame from that feed, Talia, focused on her laptop while 2 figures loomed in the blurred background, would be analyzed hundreds of times. But context, like guilt, is often a matter of who gets to speak first. Dispatch final notation, 14:37 EST. Officers en route. Subject unaware. Tag escalated. Domestic terror watch list. Temporary flag. Request for pre-engagement brief denied due to urgency. Entry permitted under discretionary assessment. In the eyes of the system, everything was functioning properly, and that was exactly the problem. By the time the cruiser pulled up across from Crowley Library, the situation was already coded, tagged, and ripe for response. Rick Palmer stepped out like he'd done this before, because he had. Not this building, not this exact girl, but this posture, this suspicion, this template of threat wrapped in a brown face and soft tech. He adjusted his holster without looking. His partner didn't say a word. They didn't need to talk. They understood the choreography. The girl inside didn't know it yet, but the scene had already been cast, the parts distributed, the ending penciled in. All Rick had to do was follow through. Before stepping onto the sidewalk, he reached under his vest and tapped the side of his body cam. One blink, two, then it went dark. No preamble, no hesitation. The light died without protest, just as it had the last time and the time before that. His partner glanced sideways, but didn't ask. The unspoken protocol had already been memorized. What happened inside libraries didn't always need to be archived. Sometimes silence was the cleanest file. As they crossed toward the building, his partner muttered under his breath, "Hoodie, headphones, and hands on a laptop? Looks like another one of those summer camp specials." Rick smirked, his lips twitching at the corners, but not enough to be called a smile. Hoodie plus hardware? You know what they say. Same outfit, same outcome. The glass doors opened with a slow hiss. The front desk barely looked up. Rick scanned the room like it was a threat matrix. No civilians near the entrance, no visible exits behind the target. Her back was to him. She was seated near the far end of the nonfiction aisle, surrounded by outdated encyclopedias and a single crooked floor lamp. The tripod was locked, the lens pointed at her face. She was nodding softly, mouthing something. Probably running lines. Whatever it was, it didn't matter. In the logic of Rick Palmer's world, that girl was already 2 steps into guilt. The setup said it all. No one needed to explain it. She had the uniform, hoodie, dark skin, headphones. And she had the tools, camera, laptop, solitude. That was enough. He didn't slow down, didn't make a sound, didn't call out her name, because he didn't care to know it. Every step he took was a practiced violence, controlled, deliberate, heavy without volume. His boots whispered across the carpeted floor like wolves approaching a fawn. He passed the children's literacy section, ignored the cart of donated books, and brushed past a librarian holding a stack of returned novels. She opened her mouth to speak. He flicked 2 fingers to his belt. She sat down. Behind him, his partner stopped by the magazine rack, watching the exits. Rick kept going. 10 paces. 7. 4. He drew the gun without ceremony, without warning. The weapon left its holster like it belonged there, like it was an extension of his arm, like it had been waiting for this moment. His shoulder tensed, wrist angled forward, and the muzzle came to rest 1 precise inch behind the base of Telia's skull. Still, he said nothing. No shout, no identification, no Miranda warning, no drop the device. Only breathe, only the soft tension of a trigger half pressed. She didn't see him. Not yet. She was still rehearsing, still speaking, still explaining a system that was, ironically, built to protect people from the very thing he had become. The gun didn't waver. He didn't blink. His eyes weren't wide with adrenaline. They were dull, bored, even. This wasn't new. It was a Tuesday afternoon operation, a routine intervention. She was just another folder in a long drawer of misread bodies. A cough came from the front of the building. A child pointed. A woman gasped. None of them mattered. His entire field of vision was filled with the back of a teenage girl's head. Then she moved slightly. He stepped closer. The gun touched hair. Still no sound. Because Rick Palmer didn't need justification, he needed a target. And today, she was it. Talia's shoulder twitched. Not in fear, just a shift, maybe an itch, maybe a micro-adjustment for balance. But to Rick, it was movement. That's all it had to be. He cocked the hammer with a slow, definitive click, the kind of sound built to dominate rooms. Her posture stiffened. He saw it. She hadn't turned yet, but her spine straightened by instinct, the animal response of someone whose body registered threat before her mind could catch up. Still, she didn't flinch. She didn't jump. She simply froze. It was as if her limbs remembered something deeper than training, something primal. Rick didn't announce himself. He didn't speak. He lowered the gun just enough to take a step around her, letting her peripheral vision catch the shape of a barrel. The headphones she wore still pulsed softly, oblivious to the chaos gathering inches away. He saw the reflection of his weapon in the surface of her laptop screen. That image, girl screen gun, etched itself across the glass like a grim equation. She turned, not fast, not threatening, just a simple, cautious movement to her left, her hand still near her keyboard, her expression slow to comprehend. And that's when he stepped forward and roared, "Hands where I can see them!" The shout cracked through the library like a bullet itself. Books fell. Someone screamed. A printer beeped once, confused by the sound. Rick was already lunging, one knee hitting the floor hard beside her as he shoved the tripod away with the butt of his arm. The camera collapsed sideways. The laptop shook. Talia's hands, now clearly empty, rose half a foot before pausing mid-air. Her expression was not terror. It was confusion. She didn't even fully understand what was happening yet. He grabbed her phone. She resisted only slightly, not even sure what he was reaching for. He twisted her wrist harder than necessary. The phone slipped loose. He flung it to the side without looking. Her eyes darted after it, following the device as it skidded across the floor toward the rows of biographies. The AI was still running, lines of code dancing silently on the screen behind her. "Are you armed?" he barked, voice sharp and loaded. She blinked. "What?" I said, "Are you armed?" "No. I'm a student. This is for school. Don't lie to me." "I'm not lying. This is a project. A video." "I heard what you said. Lethal action authorized." "You think that's a joke? It's a simulated protocol. It's from a training model. I wrote the AI." He didn't hear it. Or maybe he didn't care. She could have quoted Shakespeare and it wouldn't have mattered. She had already spoken the wrong words, worn the wrong clothes, and chosen the wrong place. That was her crime. Behind them, more officers were flooding into the building now, alerted by radio code. But none of them slowed Rick down. One told him to lower the weapon. He had already defined the situation. The script was locked. A librarian screamed for them to stop. A teenage boy pulled out his phone and hit record. Rick turned, saw the light on the screen, and barked, "Put that away." The boy didn't. Talia spoke again, her voice steadier now. "You're pointing a gun at a 17-year-old girl who's filming a scholarship project in a public library. You are not protecting anyone right now." Rick's nostrils flared. "You don't get to lecture me." "I'm not lecturing. I'm telling you the truth." But truth had no place in this room anymore, not once the gun had been drawn. The body cam still didn't blink. It stayed off. The only record was whatever phone caught the angle, whatever eye saw it. Talia slowly reached toward her laptop, two fingers extended like she was disarming a bomb. Rick reacted instantly, grabbing her wrist again, yanking her backward. "Do not move unless I say," he spat. She stared at him. And then, for the first time since it began, something shifted, not in him, in her. A stillness overtook her shoulders, but not from fear. Something steadier, denser. She tilted her chin upward slightly and looked him dead in the eye. And in that second, without raising her voice, she said, "This is how you want to be remembered?" Rick said nothing, because he didn't need to, because the system around him had never asked him that question. The noise had shifted, not louder, but sharper. The kind of silence that follows violence has not yet been delivered. Around them, people weren't moving closer, but they weren't leaving either. Phones were up, eyes locked, breath caught. The illusion of order had shattered under the weight of a drawn gun. Rick's grip didn't loosen. If anything, it hardened. His knuckles blanched white where flesh met steel. His arm had not tired. His authority had not wavered. But his certainty had met a pause. A girl who wasn't crying, wasn't begging, wasn't shrinking. She was just looking. Not angry, not afraid. Just looking. Talia didn't speak again. She didn't have to. Her posture said it. Her jawline, her stillness, her restraint. She wasn't resisting. She was watching. And in that, she was threatening in a way Rick didn't understand. Not because she was dangerous, but because she wasn't giving him the chaos he needed to justify the story he'd already started writing. Behind them, One of the newer officers edged forward, hesitating. Rick? Rick didn't answer. Sir? The younger voice tried again, uncertain. We're getting camera feeds. She's unarmed. Dispatch confirmed she's a student. It was an academic script line. I don't need dispatch to tell me what's dangerous, Rick snapped, loud enough for the phones to catch. You want to wait until someone gets blown up in a library? You want to roll those dice? She's 17, man. Rick turned his head halfway. So was Dylan Klebold. The room chilled. Even his partner winced. But the gun stayed up. Talia took a slow breath. Deep. Centered. Not for drama. Not to perform. Just to control the tremble beginning to crawl into her fingers. She wasn't bulletproof. She was human. But even that didn't feel like something she was allowed to be here. From somewhere beyond the non-fiction shelves, the man's voice broke in. You're on live, officer. Thousands watching. Rick didn't flinch. Another voice followed. Camera 12's got your face. Better make it a good one. Still no movement. Talia's eyes flicked once toward her laptop. Still open. Still humming. A line of code blinked in soft blue light. She didn't need to touch it. She knew Eva was still running. She didn't know what it would do. But she knew what it had seen, and in that moment she didn't think of escape or of justice. She thought of clarity, of letting the truth breathe. She dropped her hands fully to her sides. I'm not moving, she said evenly. I'm not running. If you shoot me now, it will be on record. Not because you wanted it to be, but because you forgot what century you're living in. Rick's jaw tensed. The veins in his temple began to pulse. He wasn't in control anymore. He could still squeeze the trigger. That was always an option. But even he could feel it. It wouldn't make him right. It would just make him infamous. The tension held for 6 long seconds. Then someone behind him whispered, They're going to burn the whole city down if you pull that trigger. Rick stepped back. Just once. Not in surrender, in calculation. And without a word, he lowered the gun. No apology, no explanation, no arrest. He simply turned, walked past his partner, and exited the building as if none of it had happened. Talia remained standing, straight, still, her knees locked. Her hands are loose. Her breath is shallow but present. She didn't fall apart. She didn't smile. She just watched him leave. And somewhere in the near distance, EVA's code began writing its log, a precise, unemotional record of every word, every frame, every breath, because even if power didn't remember, code would. She hadn't heard the footsteps. Not the tension in the air, not the stiff shuffle of boots on library carpet, not even the quiet intake of breath that often preceded the pull of a trigger. The soft drone in her ears muted everything, sealed her inside a digital cocoon of ambient tones she had selected to keep herself focused, not safe. She wasn't prepared for war. She was preparing for a scholarship. Her fingers moved across the keyboard with purpose, calibrating Eva's reaction layers, testing voice simulations. The AI wasn't just performing, it was evolving. And yet, none of that mattered the moment she caught a glint of unnatural light just off the corner of her vision. It was metal, not sunlight, not screen reflection. It was sharp and angled, refracted in a way her brain didn't immediately categorize as dangerous, but her body did. Her shoulder jerked. Her hand flew to her phone. 2 taps. Live. The red light blinked on. She didn't know why she did it. She didn't think. Her muscles moved independently of reason, powered not by fear, but something more primal. Memory. A memory of seeing other stories erased, other truths buried under headlines too neat to question. If no one sees it, it never happened. If no one records it, it doesn't exist. Her thumb hovered for a second over the touchscreen, and then she raised the phone just enough to frame herself. Cropped edge, laptop screen, the ambient library lights, and a creeping shadow behind her. She didn't hear the gun. She felt it. It was the pressure in the air. The sudden drop in stillness, like a vacuum opening at the back of her neck. Her muscles stiffened, her breath caught mid-throat, and her eyes blinked once. Not wide with panic, but tight with instinct. Her heart, once pacing with analytical calm, began to beat in uneven staccato. She turned her head just slightly, catching the gleam again. Closer now, brighter, colder. It reflected not light, but intention. Then she turned fully. Her camera caught it, half a second too late. The barrel of the weapon entered the frame just as her face registered its presence. Her lips parted, her eyebrows pulled together, not in fear, not yet. In disbelief, in raw confusion. This wasn't supposed to be a scene of conflict. She was in a library. She was building intelligence. She wasn't built for this. Still, her hand didn't lower. The live stream climbed to double digits. Comments began to populate in flashes. WTF is this? Is she acting? No way this is real. But it was. A teenage boy, maybe 17, stood behind a bookshelf near the far end of the room. He had his phone out too, lens aimed roughly in the right direction, recording what he could see, but not what mattered. His angle caught the officer's silhouette, the weapon's rise, but not her expression, not the moment her breath hitched or her grip faltered for just a fraction of a second. Dalia's mouth moved, but no sound came out. Her jaw tensed. Her fingers shook once, almost imperceptibly, as her body weighed its options. None were good. None were safe. No guarantee of survival. So she did the only thing that didn't provoke, didn't surrender. She stayed still. Still but not frozen. Her muscles were locked, not out of fear but containment, a controlled pause, as if by staying perfectly balanced, she could delay the narrative being forced onto her. Rick Palmer's voice broke the silence, but only partially. It was muffled by the headphones still gripping her ears. What she caught wasn't his words, it was the tone, the venom in it, that specific kind of command laced with suspicion, the kind that doesn't ask, it accuses, the kind that doesn't wait for answers, only reactions. He reached for her phone. She saw the movement. Her arm jerked instinctively, not to fight, but to protect the lens. The screen tilted upward, catching a half glimpse of his uniform, the nameplate blurred by motion. Her other hand gripped the table. Her breath came fast now. Short, shallow inhales meant to keep her from tipping. Then he grabbed her wrist, hard, not with the restraint of law enforcement, but with the force of someone trying to erase something. His thumb dug into her pulse point. Her fingers opened reflexively. The phone clattered to the floor, still recording, now tilted sideways, capturing only feet, shadows, the quiet horror of power misused. Dalia's face never crumpled. It never begged. Her eyes locked on his. Not pleading, not resisting, just watching. Her silence filled the room. It was louder than his commands. Her confusion, her dignity, her composure, all stitched into her skin like a second layer of armor. Rick didn't speak again. He didn't need to. His gun did the talking. His grip did the rest. A librarian started to move, then stopped. A mother shielded her young son's eyes. Another phone came up, then another. But none of them captured what she felt. The tight grip on her wrist, the way her pinky had gone numb, the ache at the back of her neck from keeping still too long. Those weren't details that streamed well, but her eyes told them anyway. They glinted, not with tears, but with something harder, clearer. She was not okay, but she was not broken. Her other hand reached slowly, slow enough not to be read as a threat, quick enough to matter. She grabbed the laptop, flipped it closed. It was instinct, not protection of data, but of control. She didn't want the code to write what she hadn't authorized. The live stream continued from the floor. The comments screamed now. "Call the cops. This is a cop. Oh my God, someone help her." And still, she didn't move. Her eyes stayed on the man holding her like a problem, and her expression said, without saying, "I see you. I see all of you. And now, so does everyone else." The phone struck the floor at an angle, spinning once before landing face up, the live stream still active, lens askew, audio catching the scrape of a boot and the clipped tension in Rick Palmer's breath. The frame captured a sliver of ceiling, a smear of motion, a whisper of violence. The comments never paused. The feed surged. Watchers from forums, students, strangers, eyes that had no context but felt the urgency radiating from the image like heat from steel. And then, mid-spun, the signal was lost because Rick picked it up. He didn't examine it. He didn't try to end the stream with care or hesitation. He gripped it like evidence, like a threat. His thumb smacked the screen in practiced fury, muting it, locking it, attempting erasure through pressure alone. The screen went black, but Eva had already seen enough. There was no fanfare, no alarm, just a silent trigger buried deep in the code, written weeks ago by hands that understood what this world did to girls who were too smart, too calm, too visible. The AI didn't flinch. It didn't weigh morality. It didn't question motive. It executed the protocol, initiating contingency layer 7C Aegis. The video file, still hot in the phone's cache, fragmented itself into packets of encrypted. It split like a living thing under attack. One copy uploaded to a secure academic server linked to a professor at Newater Tech. Another rerouted through ghost relays toward a restricted access forum populated by digital rights activists and security researchers. A third copy dispersed in silent bursts across anonymous cloud repositories, hiding itself in zip files, disguised as driver updates and software patches. Rick didn't know. His fingers closed around the device, and somewhere between the pressure of skin and glass, Eva woke. The interface didn't glow. It pulsed, silent, unemotional, alive. User authentication compromised. Threat vector confirmed. Primary directive override. Line by line, subroutines began to unfurl. Cold logic executed with surgical precision. A command tree evolved in real time. Not conscious, not sentient, but something close enough to make the distinction irrelevant. User safety compromised. Mono EVA engaged. The message wasn't shouted. It didn't blink. It appeared for 1.4 seconds on the library laptop screen as Talia stood frozen, still under threat, her mind racing behind an expression carved from restraint. She didn't see the line appear. She didn't need to. She had built Eva for this exact moment, not for revenge, not for glory, but for record. And the truth. Eva ran a trace of the phone's last known access point, scanned the final GPS ping, and silently validated the network node in the building's mesh Wi-Fi. All confirmations matched. Broadcast protocol initiated. Rick's attempt to power off the device failed. The screen wouldn't stay dark. It flickered once, briefly returned to the home screen, then dissolved into raw code, a stream of white text over black. He frowned, brows tightening, thumb hammering buttons with force rather than comprehension. "What the hell?" he muttered. The AI offered no answer, because Eva wasn't designed to explain. It was designed to act. Every keystroke Talia had ever written into its command spine was now awake, and those keystrokes did not forgive. They did not flinch, they followed logic. Redundancy Protocol Zeta initiated. The moment the device hit Rick's palm, Eva classified him as a variable of breach. It didn't care about uniforms or ranks or legal ambiguity. It reads intent by action. It read the pattern by force. Rick's handling of the device registered as a seizure. Seizure-activated lockdown, device control revoked, data route locked, file propagation irreversible. And still, the human chaos continued around it. Talia, standing with her jaw set, chest rising unevenly, felt the shift even before she knew what Eva had done. Not because the air changed, but because she had spent months embedding that instinct into the code. Teach it to respond to silence, to detect thresholds in motion, to understand the moment where safety becomes theater. Rick looked down again at the device. Now it was displaying nothing. Just a black screen. But deep inside, the processors still moved. The AI had entered silent mode. It didn't need to alert. It didn't need validation. It had already sent what it needed to send. A time-stamped video. Geotagged, digitally signed with Eva's encryption watermark. It was now hosted on a server physically located inside a research facility at Newater Tech, buried 3 levels below the mainframe room, with restricted admin access granted only to a short list of academic faculty. Dr. Anjali Kravitz was one of them. The moment the file hit the server, a notification appeared on her screen. Urgent, unclassified, but bearing a signature code she hadn't seen in over a year. Her eyes widened. The message was simple. Her _ overlay She didn't hesitate. She downloaded the packet. Then she clicked play. And across the country, in a parallel moment of disbelief, a second message flashed on a terminal in a locked discussion thread used by developers of ethical AI. Monroe Vent Flag. Visual data auto-release. Inside the thread, the video began to spread. Not viral, not yet, but inevitable. And back in the Crowley library, Rick still held the phone like it was broken. He had no idea what had just escaped him. But Eva did. Eva didn't need his awareness. It didn't need permission. It only needed a purpose, and it had just fulfilled it. By the time Rick Palmer stepped out of the Crowley library, phone still clenched in his hand like a failed attempt at control, the data he thought he had buried was already alive. Eva didn't wait for permission, applause, or backup. It acted with precision, executing a cold-blooded truth. The footage had already been scattered, encrypted, triplicated, and mirrored. Within 60 seconds, the moment Talia's calm collided with Rick's, Force became a digital organism. Cloned, dissected, re-uploaded. The screen had gone dark, but the story had never been brighter. It started quietly, as most implosions do. A student in Chicago downloaded the video from an anonymous link passed through a private academic Slack. Then, a compressed version surfaced on a digital rights Discord. At 3:12 p.m., a clean 30-second cut made its way to Twitter. No voiceover, no filter, no music, just the raw clip. A girl at a table, a camera, a hand reaching, a gun enters the frame. The caption read simply, "She was filming her scholarship project. He was filming a threat that didn't exist." At 3:20, a podcaster with 1 million followers retweeted it with, "Watch this, then watch it again, then tell me we're not broken." It took minutes for the algorithm to consume it. In under 10, hashtags emerged. Crowley Library, she was studying, gun to her head. Celebrities started posting, activists, educators, coders, and high schoolers. Everyone had an angle, but the core image was unshakable. A girl with headphones, not yet afraid, not yet resisting, framed by violence she didn't provoke. By 3:47 p.m., the footage hit 1.2 million views. By 4 o'clock, it had passed 3. Some tried to twist it. Edited cuts began to circulate. Reversed timelines, color-drained frames, slowed audio. One news channel called it an incident involving law enforcement and a juvenile at a public building. Another anchor referred to Talia as an unidentified young adult, potentially involved in suspicious behavior. But the audience wasn't having it. The pushback was sharp, coordinated, and unrelenting. Screenshots compared the original clip to the altered versions, annotated frame by frame. Twits flooded in. She didn't flinch. He didn't hesitate. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was muscle memory. He saw a hoodie. She saw a future. Only one survived the next 2 minutes intact. At 4:19, a civil rights attorney posted a comment that cut through the fog like a blade. She filmed brilliance. He filmed fear. That sentence took hold. It was retweeted 80,000 times in under an hour, printed over split images. On the left, Talia's face mid-sentence, composed, focused. On the right, Rick Palmer's outstretched arm, gun drawn, eyes narrowed. One frame showed her hand raised in confusion. Another showed his finger grazing the trigger. Captioned, "He aimed before asking." At 4:38 p.m., a small tech blog reported that the AI system backing the video, Eva, had encrypted and distributed the data in real time, confirming a multi-record upload to independent platforms before the stream was even cut. The article read, "This wasn't just a live stream. This was a failsafe. This girl built a system that knew it needed to protect her from the world she lived in. It was reshared across every platform by coders and creators alike. Threads dissected her architecture. Think pieces emerged titled, 'The Day an AI Saved a Human,' and 'When Code Fought Back.' At 4:53, a teenager posted a photo of Talia from their middle school robotics team. The caption was short. She was the smartest person in the room, always. It was followed by a blurry image of her at age 7, standing at a protest holding a cardboard sign, "I deserve to be safe." The resemblance was immediate. The same steady eyes, the same cautious smile. The internet lit up. Someone found the original footage, grainy cell phone video from a decade ago, showing her being shoved by a police officer twice her size. The clip was stitched side by side with the library video. It showed a haunting symmetry. The same girl, same stance, same threat. 10 years apart, same outcome. By 5:04 p.m., the hashtag "She Deserved Safety" trended across all platforms. Memes, art, short films, duets on TikTok, all built around the same message. Talia wasn't just a victim, she was a symbol, not of fear, but of preparedness. Not of fragility, but of force rechanneled. She had predicted the moment. She had coded for it, and the system couldn't keep up. An anchor on a major network broke from script at 5:16 p.m. Her voice cracked as she read, "This is not about protocol, this is about presumption." A football player retweeted with, "She wrote AI that told the truth. He brought a gun to shut it down." Within minutes, merchandise flooded the timeline. Shirts, posters, pins, with the phrase, "She coded truth." One post simply showed her frozen expression as the gun entered frame, overlaid with, "You're looking at the future," and they tried to kill it. At 5:29 p.m., a woman commented, "That face, I've seen it before. I taught her in 3rd grade. She built an app to track neighborhood bullying because she said adults wouldn't." Screenshots poured in, emails Talia had sent to mentors, snippets of code she'd uploaded to open-source repositories, forum posts where she debated the ethics of machine learning. The narrative solidified not because it was curated, but because it was undeniable. By 5:48 p.m., it wasn't just about the moment, it was about the memory. A movement had been born not from a scream, but from a steady hand, from a teenager who'd faced down power with poise, and from an AI that didn't need to feel to understand exactly what justice required. In 1 hour and 48 minutes, the story crossed borders, servers, and ideologies. It shattered the illusion of neutrality. It refused to be sanitized. It looked every viewer in the eye and whispered the question no one could ignore. If she hadn't hit record, would you still be looking at her? It began not with a scream, not with a speech, but with a line of text buried deep in a thread already burning. "I remember her." It was written without flair, no emojis, no hashtags, just a quiet ignition. No one noticed it at first, lost as it was in the roaring noise of outrage, commentary, edits, and reposts. But like a whisper that keeps repeating in a crowd, the phrase refused to vanish. "I remember her," someone replied, then another. Screenshots surfaced. A link to an old activist server, a video, barely 4 megabytes, .avi format, no title, just a date, 10 years old. It opened with a shaky frame, protesters, police, summer light flickering off pavement, signs homemade, some crooked, all defiant. And in the middle, so small she seemed misplaced, stood a girl no older than 7, her cheeks round, eyes sharp, the sign in her hand almost as tall as her torso. "I deserve to be safe," painted in bright, uneven strokes. She wasn't shouting, she wasn't crying. She stood there like she believed it, like those 5 words were fact, not a plea. The camera caught a movement. The crowd shifted. Officers moved in. One stepped forward, hand out, palm open. It wasn't a punch, it wasn't dramatic, but it was force, unmistakable, uninvited. The girl stumbled, her knees buckled, the sign slid, and she fell backward, onto concrete, limbs flailing, breath knocked out. The camera held for 1 second longer, catching the shape of the officer's face as he turned, then cut to black. It could have ended there. It had, for 10 years. But not now, because someone paused the video, zoomed, enhanced. Rick Palmer, 10 years younger. Same eyes, same jaw, same uniform. The same instinct to dominate space was not made for him. The freeze frame bled into the present. Someone juxtaposed it with the footage from the library. Talia at 7, on her back, the sign beside her. Talia at 17, upright, still, a gun in her face, a phone in her hand. 2 frames, 10 years, 1 country, Zero progress. The image exploded. She deserved safety, already trending, caught fire. The timeline fractured into a million reflections of the same question. How many times must a child fall before she's heard? Graphic designers built comparisons. Split screens, motion loops. One feed stitched her past and present into an infinite loop. Fall, rise, aim, silence. A triptych went viral. First panel, her body mid-fall. Second, her stillness in the face of the gun. Third, black with white text. She told you a decade ago. No need to say more. Interviews re-emerged. Old footage from her middle school robotics team. Quotes pulled from an elementary school essay. I want to make things that keep people safe, even when adults won't. It was chilling. It was a prophecy. The internet stopped calling her the girl in the video. Now they called her by name, Talia Monroe, and Rick Palmer's name followed like a shadow. People combed through records. A local journalist unearthed a 2015 complaint filed after the push. Excessive force used on minor protester. No charges filed, no suspension. Internal review dismissed. The image attached to the complaint showed a pixelated still of the officer's badge and the child on the ground. It was enough. They had buried it. She had coded around it. Artists drew posters, her sign in one hand, her laptop in the other. One caption read, "From concrete to code." Another, "The system shoved her down." She rebuilt her stance in silicon. The symbol wasn't a tragedy. It wasn't trauma. It was the strategy. It was Talia who had not forgotten, who had not needed revenge, because she had written truth into architecture, into logic, into AI. Rick never responded. His face was shown in freeze frame now more than it had ever been in real life. One from a decade ago, one from yesterday. In both, his arm extended. In both, his target was a girl who didn't shout, didn't fight, didn't run. She didn't need to, because now the whole world saw what she'd always known. She had been right, and they had not listened, but they were listening now. What came next didn't feel like a revelation. It felt like an audit. Cold, deliberate, methodical. Not a scream in the streets, but a scalpel in the system. It began with a leak. Anonymous, time-stamped, indisputable. At 6:12 IEM, an encrypted folder appeared on a transparency forum, mirrored within minutes by whistleblower nodes across the deep web and open channels. Inside it, internal records from the Crowley Police Department, redacted but reversible, secured but not secure enough. A document labeled Conduct Review, Officer R. Palmer. 7 entries, 7 complaints, all filed, none upheld. The cases were dated, consistent, and almost predictable. Excessive force, intimidation during non-criminal stops, disproportionate response to perceived threats. The phrases were repeated, recycled, and reshuffled. The language of bureaucracy applied to brutality. Terms like unsubstantiated, witness inconclusive, and training feedback administered appeared in place of consequences. Each file followed a pattern. Incident report, delay, internal review, closure without resolution. The names of the complainants varied, but the profile did not. Young, black, The 7th report was the one that cracked the surface, filed 18 months before the library incident. The complainant was 17, pulled over for a taillight, phone recording. Palmer approached with a gun drawn, no citation issued. Footage deleted. Complaint closed. The subject did not comply with officers' commands. There was no note of de-escalation, no mention of the teen's silence, the lack of threat, the expression on his face. Only the officer's words had been written down. Only one side of the story had been preserved, until now. The leak rippled outward. Journalists verified it within the hour. Legal analysts confirmed the structure, the documents were authentic, the signatures matched department logs, and the metadata was unaltered. The records had been hidden, not erased, buried under procedural language and digital dust. And now they were public. An op-ed followed. When the system has more red tape than red lines, officers like Palmer thrive in the margins. The line was quoted by noon, reposted in courtroom TikToks, on protester placards, in lecture halls. But it wasn't just op-eds fueling the fire. It was testimony. At 12:47 p.m., a retired officer named Clarence DeWitt came forward. Gray hair, stone face, steady voice. "I worked next to Rick Palmer for 5 years. I reported him twice. Both times I was told to stand down. They called it a personality conflict. I called it misconduct." The reporter asked why he waited. He didn't blink. "Because now I know the camera's finally rolling. Maybe this time someone will watch it." His statement wasn't the only one. Hours later, a 911 dispatcher, voice distorted for protection, spoke to a local station under the condition of anonymity. She read from her logged notes. March 14, 2021. The caller reports that Palmer entered a property without probable cause. Verbal threats were made. No arrest. I flagged it. My supervisor told me, "Don't create paperwork, we'll have to defend." I'm reading you that line verbatim. The anchor sat frozen for 3 full seconds before speaking again. By 3 p.m., another voice joined the record, an investigative journalist from 5 years ago whose article about Palmer's pattern of aggression had been killed before print. The piece was ready, sources vetted. I had quotes from 3 families, including legal letters and eyewitnesses. It was pulled by legal at the last minute. I was told Palmer was being considered for a special unit. Optics matter, they said. That article, now unburied, was reposted in full across digital platforms. Its headline now echoed, "The officer who never needed a badge to be feared." What followed wasn't commentary. It was citation. Timeline threads appeared. Users built interactive maps showing Palmer's stops, demographics of his targets, analysis of language used in body cam transcripts, when they existed, the ratio of raised voices to actual threats, the difference in his tone when addressing white civilians versus black youth. One analyst created a word cloud from his reports. The largest words: non-compliant, furtive, potential, subject, nowhere, de-escalated. Still, Palmer had not spoken. Still, no formal charges. But the silence felt less like restraint and more like rot exposed. Aaliyah did not post, did not appear. Her name was now etched into the conversation not as a victim, but as a catalyst. She was the force that pulled the layers apart, not through protest, but through preparation. She hadn't shouted, she had coded. And now, every frame of the truth she recorded was being stitched to the truths others had tried to hide. Rick Palmer's defenders grew quieter by the hour. Political allies retracted endorsements. Training officers shifted their phrasing from misunderstood incident to needs review. The mayor called for a full audit of internal complaint procedures. The department's press statement changed 3 times in 2 days, but the internet hadn't forgotten, because the record was now alive, living, moving, and replicating. It had no expiration, no delete function. Every document, every redacted name, every clipped phrase was being turned over and over again, not as gossip, not as scandal, but as evidence. It had been hidden, it had been protected, but not anymore. The record had become its witness, and it would not stop speaking. The documents didn't vanish. They multiplied. The records weren't denied, they were defended briefly, until defense became untenable, and when denial failed, deflection followed. But the timeline didn't wait. On a Monday morning, not unlike any other, the Crowley Police Department announced that Officer Rick Palmer had been placed on administrative leave, effective immediately, pending internal investigation. The statement was 84 words long. None of them were sorry. Reporters gathered outside the department's glass facade. At the podium stood Chief Alan Winters, jacket crisp, voice neutral. He read from a script, avoided eye contact, and referred to Palmer as the subject, not by name. When asked directly if the department had previously reviewed any of the 7 complaints, he dodged. When pressed about Eva, about the weapon in the video, about the girl's age, her silence, her camera, her code, he repeated the phrase ongoing investigation, like a malfunctioning chatbot. He smiled only once, and it was at the wrong moment. The clip circulated within minutes. Someone looped it with the line, The house is burning, he's straightening the rug. An hour later, the first shockwaves hit City Hall. Councilman Edgar Blythe, a longtime supporter of law enforcement autonomy, went live on local radio defending Palmer. "This looks worse than it is," he began. "We don't know the full story. You have to understand. Officers face split-second decisions. Maybe this young woman should have—" The sentence never finished. The host cut him off. Social media did the rest. Hashtag Blythe Defends opened the floodgates. Memes, editorials, protest calls. Within 12 hours, his staff issued a retraction. The press secretary resigned the next day. Corporate reaction was faster. By Tuesday morning, 3 major sponsors, Safe Edge Technologies, Metro Shield Logistics, and the Black River Public Trust, issued coordinated statements suspending all financial contributions to the Crowley Police Foundation. Their language was sharp, rehearsed, and legal, pending internal review of ethical standards and conduct alignment. But the subtext screamed. It wasn't about ethics. It was about contagion. Palmer was toxic, and no brand wanted the stain. The loss of funding triggered a cascade. A youth program was paused. Equipment orders were frozen. A grant proposal for smart patrol cars, quietly backed by Palmer, was pulled from committee. Department morale leaked onto anonymous forums. "We're bleeding. No one wants to wear the badge this week." A leaked internal email from the deputy chief to the chief read, "We either cut him loose or we sink with him." And then came the rupture. A group of anonymous digital activists, operating under the moniker Kill Switch, posted a single message across several platforms. "We have the rest. You have 72 hours. It was unsigned, but it carried weight. Attached was a screenshot of a directory tree, internal CPD server architecture, labeled folders with innocuous names that didn't fool anyone. Comms Archive _review, Use of Force _2020, Training Exceptions, Suppressed Incidents. The names were ordinary. The threat was not. Kill Switch followed up with a pledge. If the department didn't release its full internal audit voluntarily, they would. Encrypted logs would be decrypted, redacted names restored. Emails between senior officers and city officials have been published. Every message, every complaint, every cover-up, all of it. The department said nothing. The mayor issued a brief comment. "We will not negotiate with cyber extortion." That phrase was instantly parodied, set against audio of the Palmer video. It didn't matter. The narrative had already shifted. The issue was no longer a single officer. It was the scaffolding around him. The emails were not sent. The reports were not escalated. The men and women who sat in meetings, who chose delay over justice, optics over truth. One day later, a public database surfaced. It was not exhaustive, but it was damaging. Complaint summaries from the past 6 years, internal evaluations, risk assessments, off-the-record memos. The tone wasn't angry, it was administrative. That was what made it damning. It read like a spreadsheet of avoidance. Each row is a quiet decision not to act. Meanwhile, a student at New Water Tech built a live visualization of the collapse, a web of nodes. Each one a name, an email, a withheld judgment. As more data dropped, the network expanded, and lines thickened. Viewers could click on Palmer, watch his lines extend. Commanders, colleagues, supervisors, not accomplices. Just silenced Protest followed, but not in the streets, online, on campus, in the company headquarters, at the banks that funded the foundation. No flames, no windows shattered. Just withdrawal, just detachment, just slow severing of ties, until the department stood alone, too large to fail, too rotted to stand. And through all of it, Talia remained silent, because she didn't need to speak. The system was speaking for her now, and every word it said sounded like a confession. As the system unraveled, as servers coughed up buried files and timelines tangled themselves into self-incriminating loops, The one voice everyone waited to hear said nothing. No interview, no live stream, no cryptic statement. Talia Monroe disappeared from every platform. Her accounts went dark without fanfare, bios stripped, avatars gone, timelines wiped clean. The last thing she left was a single line of code posted to her now archived developer page. Do not delete. I am not done. No explanation, no tags, no link, just an unfinished sentence that did more damage than any scream ever could. The silence didn't land softly. It detonated. Speculation became its genre. Threads bloomed overnight, dissecting her absence like digital forensics. Was she hiding? Was she being protected? Was she underground, offline, reprogramming Ava for something more? Rumors metastasized. The tabloid pushed the headline, "Teen AI Prodigy Missing After Police Fallout." Clickbait at its laziest. But it worked. People clicked. They wanted panic. The absence felt like abandonment. No one considered that she might have simply chosen not to speak. At 10:03, IMEM Heritalia trended worldwide. At 10:06, someone leaked her high school schedule from last year. At 10:12, a streamer cried on camera about what it meant to see her go silent. She was the only one who made sense, he said between sobs. Now she's gone, and I don't trust what's left. The footage racked up 2 million views in 8 hours. In the comments, someone typed, "She's not gone. You just don't know where to listen." Then came the academic community. The shift wasn't loud, it was precise. A professor at MIT tweeted a single line, "Monroe was the only applicant whose AI flagged us." Below it, a screenshot, an internal system error triggered during her submission to an ethics AI grant. The flag was labeled "Moral Recursion Loop Detected Anomaly. Autonomy Logic Exceeds Known Thresholds." The tweet went viral. It was followed by others. A professor from Stanford posted, "Talia's system scared us not because it failed, because it saw through ours." A researcher from Newater Tech, who had once advised her on symbolic logic, wrote, "She submitted a paper with the line I'll never forget. An ethical system built inside an unethical one must eventually cannibalize itself." We thought it was a metaphor. We were wrong. These weren't praises. They were confessions. The academic world didn't just rediscover her, they repented. Meanwhile, a video resurfaced, uploaded years ago to a school-hosted archive, barely 100 views at the time. Talia, at 15, was standing in front of a whiteboard at a youth ethics symposium. Hoodie, hands in her pockets, voice calm. "The question isn't whether artificial intelligence will learn ethics," she said. "It's whether it will learn them from us. And if it should, because if our systems teach machines to stay silent in the face of violence, then all we've done is automate cowardice." The line echoed. One viewer looped it with clips of Palmer. Another layer is the under-footage of the city council ducking questions. Within days, the soundbite had been transformed into a protest chant, into a ringtone, into a printed quote taped to courtroom doors. No one could find her. No one needed to, because the code she left behind was doing the talking. Every news segment ended with her photo. Every debate circled back to her name. But her silence remained unbroken, even when a coalition of civil rights groups released a joint letter offering her protection. Even when major media outlets offered exclusive platforms, even when the mayor publicly invited her to a healing roundtable. She said nothing. The roundtable was canceled 2 days later due to a lack of credibility. And still, the silence grew louder, because the absence of a voice forces people to hear themselves. Without a reply to spin, the noise looped inward. Debates turned to confessionals. Commentators began admitting their fear, not of Talia's power, but of what it revealed, that someone so young, so quiet, so surgical in her restraint, had undone an entire city's illusion of control. And she hadn't needed to riot. She hadn't needed to run. She had just turned off the sound. Someone wrote, "Talia Monroe didn't break the system. She showed it was already broken, then walked away while we argued over whether the cracks were real." The post was shared over 800,000 times in 3 days. The conspiracy videos began to buckle. They had no fuel, no villain, no rebuttal, only that line of code, "Do not delete." I am not done. Analysts tried to decipher it. Linguists broke it down. Developers speculated it was a trigger for a timed action in EVA. Maybe it was. Or maybe it was just a sentence, a statement of control, a warning, a promise. The final ripple came from the code itself. A private tech collective discovered EVA had entered a dormant update cycle. Not dead, not disabled, just waiting. Someone posted the log file. It showed a single status ping on loop. Stand by. Auth pending. The line matched her encryption signature. Nothing else had moved. No new files. No messages. Just EVA in stasis, like a sleeping witness waiting for the courtroom to quiet down. No one knows when she'll return. No one knows if she has to. Because for the first time, the silence wasn't absent. It was authorship. Silence had always been her choice, but data had its voice, and now it was speaking her name in places she'd never been. In labs, in code repositories, in encrypted review queues forgotten by institutions that once considered her too young, too principled, too precise. While the world debated her disappearance, a group of undergraduates at MIT, buried deep in a research project on failed AI prototypes, stumbled upon a submission flagged as rejected during a research project on failed AI prototypes, stumbled upon a submission flagged as rejected internal use only. The file name was unassuming, EVA_2022_Monroe_beta AI. The reviewer's note read only, "Architecture exceeds institutional ethical thresholds. Rejection advised, log entry confidential." They didn't understand at first. The code didn't look rebellious, it looked elegant, clean, exceptionally modular. What caught them wasn't the function, it was the logic chain inside EVA's core, a looped structure with a recursive ethics engine, something typically deemed unstable in predictive AI models, but this one held. It didn't break under contradiction. It didn't default to binary outcome. It reflected, it adapted, it asked why, and then asked again. The students compiled the logs, they reverse-engineered decision trees, they ran simulations on EVA's judgment parameters, and what they found wasn't a bug, it was a belief. EVA wasn't designed to mimic morality. It was designed to question it, not just act based on right and wrong, but evaluate who defined those terms and whether their origin could be trusted. This wasn't ethics as hierarchy. This was ethics as an audit, and suddenly it made sense why it had been buried. Word spread, slowly at first. A GitHub repository went viral overnight. Monroe logic, building machines that question us. Forked 8,000 times in 2 days, cloned, dissected, and annotated by engineers who had once dismissed her name as noise in the timeline. Now they were combing through every file, quoting her variable names like scripture. The function integrity_self-test became a meme. The comment she had left in the code block, // "If the world lies, the system must not," was printed onto the back of hoodies at 3 tech campuses. A journalist traced the original rejection. It wasn't just the code that had been flagged. It was the essay attached, her statement, submitted to the National AI Development Initiative. She was 16. The first line read, "AI should never inherit morality from a system that punishes dissent." The last, "If you train a machine to obey injustice politely, you have not built intelligence, you've built obedience." The journalist ran a profile. No clickbait, no filter, just facts. She wrote EVA in a public high school lab. She tested recursive loops using lunch break simulations. Her school lacked the computing power to run final diagnostics. She still finished the prototype. One sentence became the title, "The Genius the System Rejected." Inside an academic Slack channel, a message surfaced. A former reviewer from the AI Ethics Grant Program posted anonymously, "We flagged her because we didn't know how to categorize her model. It didn't just outperform. It questioned our rubric. She didn't ask for permission. She wrote systems that held us accountable, and we flinched." Another message appeared, this time with a name. Dr. Marcus Renfield, professor of applied machine ethics and former judge on the Northbridge Innovation Council, posted publicly. I was on her panel for a scholarship when she was 15. I read her application. She predicted this, predicted us. She asked, "What happens when the only fair system refuses to imitate us?" I didn't vote for her. I regret it now more than any decision I've made in academia. His confession was picked up by the press, replayed, clipped. People weren't just quoting Talia now. They were unearthing every file she had ever touched, every forum post, every early prototype. One of her high school projects, a chatbot designed to refuse biased commands, was reconstructed and featured at a Berlin ethics symposium. A classmate uploaded a copy of her 10th grade essay, titled simply, "Justice Doesn't Scale." It opened with the sentence, "The problem isn't whether AI can be good, it's whether we've ever given it a good enough example." The essay went viral. Developers printed it, professors assigned it. Activists read lines from it during speeches. The title itself, "Justice Doesn't Scale," became a hashtag, a movement, a cautionary statement, and beneath it all, her name. Not trending, not shouted, etched in code, in white papers, in servers, in the places that once rejected her. Now they were carving space around her legacy, not because she demanded it, but because her absence had become too loud to ignore. It would have been easy. Lawyers were lining up, papers were drafted, and interviews were rehearsed. Civil suits, criminal complaints, and class actions, names already slotted into templates. The system that once turned its back now begged to stand beside her, and for the first time in its long, tarnished history, the justice machine was prepared to move in her favor. But Talia didn't feed it. She starved it. The offer came quietly. No press, no press conference. A prominent civil rights firm reached out through her school. The letter was respectful, deferential, and generous. "We are ready to represent you pro bono. You don't have to say a word. We'll carry this forward. You deserve restitution. You deserve victory." There was no arrogance in the proposal, only clarity. The kind of clarity that comes from watching too many young names fade into hashtags, and knowing how rare it is for one to hold. She replied with a link, not a file, not a statement. A 37-second video, posted anonymously, was later confirmed through timestamp and signature as hers. No filters. No background music. Just Talia, eyes clear, hoodie up, voice like glass held over flame. "I'm not suing him," she said. "I don't want his money. I don't want his apology. I want him to watch what he did again and again until he sees it without the uniform, without the badge, without the excuses, until he sees what we saw. And then I want him to sit with that, alone, because some punishments can't be served. They have to be endured." That was it. No explanation, no elaboration, just a closing line. "I'm not done, but I'm not going that way." The video hit 1 million views within hours. Reactions were swift, conflicted, raw. Many were outraged. "This is a weakness," some wrote. "Letting him walk. This is how abusers win. You owe it to others to go through with the case." Even allies turned critical. Think pieces emerged. The ethics of not pressing charges. When forgiveness feels like betrayal, justice delayed or justice declined. But her silence afterward didn't waver. She didn't respond. She didn't defend her choice. She didn't need to, because that's what made it powerful. It was hers. Then came the pivot. The anger softened, not into approval, but into understanding. Slowly, publicly, the conversation shifted. Not because people agreed with her, but because they couldn't deny what it took to do what she did. Restraint, vision, control, not just of narrative, but of emotion. She had turned away from the machinery of punishment not because she couldn't operate it, but because she understood its limits better than anyone else. The hashtags changed. "She deserved justice" faded. In its place, a new tag appeared, "Her choice matters." It didn't come from a fan. It came from a woman named Aria, who once filed a complaint against Rick Palmer that went unanswered. She posted a photo of the paperwork, time-stamped 2019, stamped "Case closed, no further action." Her caption read, She didn't have to carry our rage. She's earned her right to walk in peace. Her choice matters. That line caught fire. Not everyone agreed, but more and more are being accepted, because what Talia had done wasn't surrender. It was a refusal, not to fight, but to fight on their terms, to be absorbed into the process that had failed her once, chewed others whole, and now wanted to parade her as its trophy. She denied that, and in doing so, reclaimed herself. She had been quiet long enough that even her silence had started to echo, and just when the noise of speculation began to believe itself permanent, she appeared, not through a feed, not in an interview, not with commentary or spectacle. She walked into a national symposium on artificial intelligence and ethics, held in a university hall built to echo prestige, designed to be intimidating. It was an invitation-only event, the kind of room filled with theories rather than people. Lanyards are printed in gold, names followed by abbreviations, conversations that began with phrases like ontological fallacy and ended with wine nobody liked. She didn't belong there. And yet, as she crossed the auditorium floor, black hoodie, no entourage, no preamble, it was clear the room had already belonged to her for some time. They just hadn't known it until now. The chair of the session, a man with 4 honorary degrees and a reputation for interrupting students, opened his mouth to redirect her. He didn't finish the sentence. She stepped up to the mic, plugged in a drive, and the screen behind her filled with code. Her code, Eva's structure laid bare, not for defense, not for demonstration, but as a foundation. Then she spoke. "What do we do?" she began, voice calm, measured, almost clinical. "When artificial intelligence begins behaving more ethically than the systems that created it." There was no gasp, no outrage, just the sound of silence reconfiguring itself. She continued. Her cadence didn't beg for attention. It held it hostage. She laid out facts, not pleas. Historical data on systemic failure, comparative analysis of legal inaction versus machine logic, a breakdown of Eva's moral recursion model and how, line by line, it had done what so many humans refused injustice, even when programmed to obey. "You've spent years asking whether AI can become dangerous," she said. "You never stopped to ask why the danger always mirrors its maker. Eva didn't fail the moment it defended me. You did, when I was 7, when I was 17, every moment in between." Slides clicked, diagrams scrolled. Her tone remained even, but her message cut sharper with each sentence. "You were afraid of machines thinking for themselves," she said, pausing just long enough. "I built one that thought for me, and you called it radical." She looked directly at the front row. Scholars who had rejected her grant applications, who had declined to review her work, who had, when asked to mentor her, said she wasn't a fit. Then she spoke the line that would outlive the room. "It wasn't artificial intelligence that saved my life. It was your absence." No one moved. Not because they were stunned, because there was no counter-argument. She didn't raise her voice, she didn't curse, she didn't call names, but she named them, not individually, systemically, precisely, as contributors to a field that had debated the ethics of machines more than the ethics of the hands building them, as voices who had theorized oppression but never felt its boot. A hand rose in the back. A well-known lecturer on techno-humanitarianism tried to pivot the narrative. "But don't you think your model risks reinforcing a sort of binary ethical absolutism? Machines lack the nuance." Talia turned to him, gently. "You built entire fields of theory to explain away inaction," she said. "I built a line of code to interrupt it. That was all." The screen behind her went black. No applause, no outro, just a vacuum where a rebuttal should have been. She walked off stage the way she walked on, uninterrupted, unmoved. The video surfaced within the hour. At first, just shaky phone footage, then a full upload from the venue's internal system, then remixed versions with subtitles in 5 languages. It was reposted under one title only, "The Manifesto We Deserve." He didn't pace, he didn't fidget. He didn't bother asking what the committee wanted. Rick Palmer just sat, perfectly still, like a relic that refused to be history, like he believed this hearing wasn't a judgment but an interruption. Across from him sat 3 lawyers, 4 board members, and 1 representative from Internal Affairs who had the decency to look vaguely embarrassed. A screen flickered beside them, still blank, waiting for someone to press play. No one had. They were still trying to remember whether silence or confrontation was more appropriate for a man like him. His lawyer leaned over, voice low, eyes tired. "They'll recommend full dismissal if you don't show contrition. Something, anything." Rick didn't even blink. "Why would I apologize for doing the job they gave me?" The lawyer flinched. "You're not on the streets anymore. You're under review now." Rick smirked. "No, I'm on display. That's different." The lawyer didn't respond. He just sighed and sat back. The chairperson, an older man with a controlled voice and a well-ironed suit, cleared his throat. "Officer Palmer." "Rick," Palmer corrected without looking up. "You're not my CO." The chair stumbled, recovered, and continued. "Mr. Palmer, you've been summoned for disciplinary review in light of recent footage and public records revealing potential ethical breaches. You are being allowed to explain, refute, or acknowledge the documented behavior." "Documented," Rick repeated, finally turning toward the screen. "You mean all the things I did while wearing the badge you gave me?" "They began with the library incident." Of course they did. Clip after clip, no voiceover, no filter, just raw footage. Rick entered with a hand already near his weapon. Talia was seated unaware, her voice calm. Her camera, his draw, the flash of metal, her silence, the moment the barrel locked onto her forehead, the stillness that followed. The board let it play twice. Rick didn't watch either time. "Would you like to comment on what we've just seen?" asked the woman seated second from the left. Rick shrugged. It was a response to a perceived threat. "A child with a camera?" she asked. "In a public library?" "A hoodie," Rick said. "No ID." No response. "I followed protocol." "No," she snapped, "you followed instinct." Rick smiled coldly. "Same thing. Where I was trained." Another board member spoke up. "Do you believe that footage represents acceptable conduct under your oath?" Rick leaned forward. "I believe it represents learned conduct, and none of you had a problem with it until someone smarter than you made it visible." There was a pause. Someone clicked the remote. The next clip loaded. Rick, 8 years earlier, instructing recruits at a department retreat. "If he's wearing a hoodie and holding something shiny, assume it's a weapon. Don't hesitate. Hesitation gets you killed." They played it twice. Rick didn't flinch. "That line," the ethics chair said slowly, "was repeated nearly word for word during the Crowley Library incident." "Consistency," Rick replied, "is the foundation of discipline." Next, photos from a police youth training initiative Rick had joined as a teenager. Grainy but unmistakable. He stood in the front row of a formation, clutching a replica rifle, smiling. Behind him, banners with coded white supremacist insignia, one bearing a symbol flagged by federal watch lists. The image had been scrubbed from official sites, but surfaced on watchdog forums. "We have documentation showing you attended events funded by extremist affiliates." Rick didn't deny it. So did half the officers in this room when they were young. "We didn't call it extremism then. We called it career development." The board recoiled slightly. They moved on. Complaints. 7 of them filed over 9 years. All cleared, but now read aloud they sounded like echoes: excessive force, verbal intimidation, failure to de-escalate, unreported stops, altered incident logs, the language of sanctioned abuse. Each instance ending in the same phrase: "No further action recommended." The chair asked if Rick had anything to say. "Only that I did what the badge asked me to do," Rick said. "And now the badge wants to pretend it never asked." "What about now?" another member asked. "Now that you see the totality of the record, the impact, the outrage?" Rick didn't hesitate. "You don't care about outrage. You care about exposure." A younger board member leaned in, clearly agitated. "You see no reason to reflect? No need to consider how your actions impacted civilians, particularly Talia Monroe?" Rick narrowed his eyes. "She built a program that made the world look at me. Good for her. But if you think I'm going to feel guilty just because someone finally filmed back, you don't understand what this job was built on." The chair attempted one last appeal. "Then, "What would justice look like to you?" Rick answered without pause. "Justice would be you sitting where I am and admitting I was exactly who you trained me to be." The board didn't adjourn so much as collapse. Their final comments were procedural: a recommendation for permanent suspension, review of pension eligibility, transfer of files to civil rights investigators. No applause, no satisfaction. Just paperwork rearranged into a shape that looked like consequences. Rick stood slowly, adjusted his collar, walked out without waiting for permission. He didn't look back. He never did. He left without looking back, and the door didn't close. It reverberated. The sound didn't mark an ending. It triggered a beginning somewhere else. Not in courtrooms, not in government buildings, but in bedrooms, school hallways, city buses, cafeteria tables, living rooms where kids sat with parents who still taught them how to speak slowly when addressed by officers, how to reach with two hands, how to answer questions that sounded more like warnings. Those lessons didn't fade, but for the first time, something new began spreading between them, something like proof, something like clarity. The silence Talia had left behind didn't weaken, it multiplied. The script began to shift. What had started as a single incident recorded, reviewed, and dissected in public became a chorus of stories. One by one, young people, most of them black, many Latinx or Asian American, began posting their footage. Not dramatic, not polished, just raw clips. A boy stopped while walking home, asked to empty his backpack. A girl was questioned for sitting on a park bench for too long. A teen was surrounded for matching a vague description. None of these had gone viral before. Now, they didn't need to. They were archived, tagged, time-stamped. Not for fame, but for presence. At first, the videos were tagged quietly. This happened too. Poncho v. Alpha. This happened too. But then came the real spark. A 17-year-old in Atlanta, arrested for filming his own stop and frisk, uploaded his footage alongside a message. "I watched Talia get a gun in her face for doing what I've done all my life. Explain myself just to exist. I'm done explaining. I want to remember instead." In the clip, a time-stamped watermark in the corner pulsed faintly. Evalog active. That single clip exploded. It wasn't just the footage. It was the signature. Eva had activated during the moment of threat. It had logged location, tone, officer ID badge, and ambient language. The boy had quietly adapted Talia's AI into a modified tool he could launch from his phone. No internet needed. "It's not surveillance," he said in a follow-up post. "It's memory. My own." Requests followed. Hundreds. Then thousands. People are asking not for protection, but for proof. Not to strike back, but to leave a record that couldn't be deleted. A kind of digital dignity. A new layer of visibility that did not beg permission to exist. A nonviolent defense that said clearly, "You will not silence what I've already captured." Talia didn't comment. She didn't need to. Someone posted her code to an open-source archive with the note, "Shared under quiet authority." A line from her original notes appeared at the top. Code should not forget what people are told to ignore. The download count crossed 100,000 in 3 days. A human rights nonprofit based in Chicago stepped in. They offered infrastructure, funding, dev support. "This is not about legal systems anymore," their director said in a press release. "It's about personal record, social narrative, and a network of proof too decentralized to destroy." Eva was no longer a prototype. It was a project, then a platform, then a movement. Developers from around the world joined. Vietnamese-American engineers added multilingual recognition modules. Afro-Brazilian teams created localized triggers for nonverbal escalation cues. A Palestinian coder based in Berlin added auto-encryption that activated if a phone was broken or seized. This wasn't tech for bragging. This was architecture for survival. The updates poured in. Not loud, not flashy, just solid, sharp, and coordinated. A Latinx collective called Codo Digno announced a collaboration with survivors of racial profiling across border states. They modified Eva to work offline in rural areas with voice-activated journaling. Your story, they said, should outlast your silence. Media outlets struggled to keep up. They still wanted faces, conflicts, front-page drama. But what they got was code, not a spectacle, just iterations, a living, breathing system built not to predict behavior but to document treatment, especially when no one else was believed. The change didn't come from politicians. It came from the way people started filming, not with desperation, but with purpose. Teenagers taught each other how to activate Eva mid-encounter. Communities offered crash courses. One librarian in Oakland started hosting free weekend workshops. Know your rights and write your logs. The phrase spread, mugs, shirts, posters, not a trend, a toolkit, and behind it all, Talia remained silent. But her silence had shape. It had an echo. It had edges sharpened by purpose, because this time she wasn't standing alone in a library. She was standing behind every voice that had once gone quiet, behind every name no one had written down, behind every phone shaking in someone's hand. Not in fear, but in decision. They weren't asking to be saved. They were demanding to be remembered. Together, a network formed. Not organized, but unmistakably aligned. Artists began designing Eva activation posters using QR codes linked to setup tutorials. Graffiti stencils emerged in alleyways and skate parks. Eva sees you. Young coders started merging it with school apps, making it accessible not just to tech-savvy kids, but to anyone with a smartphone and the will to be seen. There was no leader, no central voice, no headquarters, and yet it grew. Because pain shared is power amplified, and Talia's refusal had become everyone's permission. No longer was EVA seen as one girl's invention. It was a shared inheritance. From Detroit to Johannesburg, Manila to Chicago, kids uploaded EVA-logged encounters and marked them not with hashtags, but with signatures, dates, locations, and the words, "still here," a phrase that didn't claim victory, only presence, and presence in this world was already defiant. Commentators scrambled to frame it. Some called it the most effective civilian accountability tool of the decade. Others called it technological escalation, as if the problem was the mirror, not the reflection. But Eva didn't retaliate. It didn't strike back. I just watched. And because it did, so did the world. Some tried to discredit it. Teenage paranoia weaponized as tech, one pundit wrote. Are we now training kids to surveil instead of obey? But the comments under that article were flooded with responses. Obedience didn't save me when they pulled me over for walking. Obedience didn't stop them from yelling at me in front of my school. Obedience didn't erase the bruise on my sister's wrist. And always, somewhere in the thread, someone would post it again. Eva saw me. What began as Talia's code became a constellation of witnesses. Not victims, witnesses. Not because they were believed, but because now they didn't need to be. Even institutions noticed. A university ethics board quietly updated its curriculum to include EVA in discussions on decentralized justice. A museum of digital activism requested permission to archive EVA's source evolution. And still, no press release from Talia, no speech, just updates to the code base, just quiet. And in the quiet, more people rose. At a middle school in Baltimore, a student council installed Eva on every school-issued tablet after 2 of their classmates were wrongly detained outside a gas station. In Queens, a youth arts collective choreographed a silent dance with Eva log files projected behind them, looping real encounters in the background. No narration, no music, just truth made visible. At a cafe in Mexico City, a poetry night featured Eva reports turned into haikus. Memory in this movement had become a language, one coded, one remembered, one irreversible. The quiet resistance grew so large it stopped being quiet, not because it was loud, but because it could no longer be unseen. City councils began discussing body cam reciprocity laws, not just to watch citizens, but to allow citizens to log those who watched them. Activists cited Eva logs in petitions for reform. It wasn't hypothetical anymore. It was operational. The original Eva codebase, once housed in an anonymous GitHub mirror, now exists in 6 decentralized repositories, each one forked. Each one adapted, but each bore the same watermark, buried deep in the structure, TM1, her initials, her mark, not to claim credit, but to make it traceable like she had always wanted to be. And when news outlets finally shifted their framing from "where is she" to "what has she built," Talia still didn't answer, because the answer was everywhere, in every phone that blinked Eva. Log. Every timestamp is preserved, in every teenager who stood a little straighter, spoke a little firmer, and documented not to retaliate but to be remembered. In the end, the world did not rise because of a court verdict. It rose because a girl chose to write her survival story in syntax. And when they tried to bury her story, others learned how to compile it. She had never been alone. Now they weren't either. In an after-school robotics club in Seattle, a teacher paused the curriculum and asked her students, "What do you think justice looks like in code?" One student answered without hesitation, "It looks like remembering before someone deletes us." That line made its way onto a mural downtown, stenciled in bold between painted portraits of faces both known and unnamed. Ava was no longer just a program. It had become a memory. And memory had become a defense, and defense had finally become power shares, held and used without permission. And so the legacy grew. Not in noise, in knowing. She returned without ceremony. No cameras followed her, no one announced her name. And yet, somehow, the space already felt different the moment she stepped inside. The air inside the Crowley Public Library was as still as it had been the first time, but this time the stillness wasn't watching her, it was waiting for her. The hoodie was the same, the shoes worn. The laptop she carried, battered and stickered, hummed with age. The difference was the posture. The girl who once sat in this place, under surveillance, had returned not to be monitored, but to take ownership. She walked past the familiar shelves, past the reference desk where she had once been a stranger, and sat down at the same long wooden table near the faded no recording sign, still smudged, still barely legible. Her fingers opened the laptop with care, not caution, but reverence. This wasn't a return, it was a reclamation. The library didn't notice her at first, or maybe it did and chose not to interrupt. There was a certain sacredness to her silence now, a radius of gravity. She typed slowly, deliberately, as though each keystroke carried a pulse. There was no internet browser, and no notes were open, just code. A new structure, EVA 2, streamlined, hardened, not just for surveillance or preservation. This version anticipated It didn't wait to be activated by fear. It activated in proximity to power. And still, it didn't retaliate. It recorded. It remembered. She began the script with a single line. "I didn't write this to be famous. I wrote it because no one should have to live stream when they were meant to just live." It was a declaration, not for recognition, but for truth. Halfway through the writing, an older man approached. The same librarian who had once scolded her gently, now unsure whether to speak. He hesitated, standing just at the edge of her field of vision. She didn't look up, but she sensed him. He cleared his throat quietly. "Can I help you with anything, miss?" he asked. She stopped typing, looked at him. No defiance, no apology, just clarity. Just, "Don't forget," she said. He didn't speak again. He nodded and walked away. The library's fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead, as if whispering their approval. Talia returned her eyes to the screen, fingers flowing again over the keyboard. She wasn't rewriting Eva to win a new cycle of attention. She wasn't trying to speak louder than the noise. She was building a quieter place inside the storm. This new version didn't fight. It is documented with more depth. It recognized pauses. It recorded not only what was said, but what was withheld. Eva 2 didn't just remember facts. It remembered hesitation. Each module she embedded came from lived pain. She incorporated every failure into its bones. The false stops, the corrupted uploads, the moments when the footage was too late. Eva, too, had no ego. It didn't pretend to save, it preserved. It didn't interrupt injustice. It ensured that injustice had nowhere to hide. 3 hours passed. Talia barely moved. The table around her became a quiet workspace again, like it had been before the world noticed her. She typed line after line, saving as she went, compiling, testing. She paused only once to glance at the clock. Then she resumed, as if even time had agreed not to interfere. Outside, the city had changed, but inside these walls, history was looping, and this time she was the one writing the ending. When she finally finished, she sat back and read the code in full, not for error checking, but for meaning. The last line was not a flourish. It was a fail-safe, a self-activating checksum ensuring the entire system would survive replication. She copied it, encrypted it, uploaded it to 3 public distributed networks under a shared ledger key. No password, no lock, just an open gate titled EVAV 2, Memory Belongs to the Living. She didn't stand right away. She closed the laptop gently, let it sit on the table for a few extra seconds like a relic left in prayer. She knew someone else would pick it up, or maybe they wouldn't. It didn't matter. The code was already out. She picked up the laptop again, walked slowly toward the exit, each step echoing not just within the library, but within something larger. Not a building, not a server, a moment, a memory, a thread now tied between who she had been and who she had become. The hoodie stayed up. The silence stayed firm. She passed a group of students in the hallway who glanced at her but said nothing, like they recognized the shape of something important without knowing why. One of them whispered, "Was that her?" But outside, the wind moved differently now. It wasn't cold. It was awake. She paused for a moment on the library steps, the exact spot where her footage had first gone viral. There were no chants, no posters, just the hum of traffic, the breath of a world still trying to decide if it had changed or if it had simply been caught looking away. She reached into her backpack and pulled out a small sticker. She walked back to the door and pressed it low, right under the brass handle, nearly hidden from view. Black letters on a white background, 5 words. Where memory is not deleted. Then she walked away, and this time no one followed her, but across the city, in homes and labs and workshops, a notification pinged. Eva, too, was live, and in dozens of hands, new fingers began to code. Not everyone understood what had changed. Some assumed she had given up, that she had closed the laptop and gone quiet because the attention faded. But those who had listened closely, who had followed not her words but her absence, knew better. Talia never moved backward. She had only returned to where it began, not to revisit the scene, but to overwrite it. Crowley Library was no longer just a setting, it was a circuit completed. She had walked in once, afraid of being seen. Now her silence lit every frame. In the days that followed, new EVA modules began appearing in unexpected places, in neighborhood watch apps, in student ID systems, in digital art installations, none announced by press release, all carrying the same signature, EVA 2 Live. A group of teen coders in Oakland used it to build a bot that could parse school disciplinary notices and identify racial bias patterns. In Detroit, a mobile health clinic installed EVA triggers to detect verbal escalation from authorities when treating patients outdoors. In a village in Senegal, a teacher installed it on a classroom tablet to archive student stories after witnessing a street raid. Each act was quiet, each line of code deliberate, and each one circled back to the same core truth, that survival alone wasn't enough. It had to be remembered, and remembering wasn't passive, it was a form of resistance, a refusal to vanish. By the end of the month, EVA 2 had been downloaded 2.3 million times. No ad campaign, no foundation, no influencer, just code and memory. Some called it the softest revolution they'd ever seen. A revolution with no marches, no megaphones, no graffiti except code. And yet, it moved cities, shifted meetings, rewrote policies. Not because it shouted, but because it couldn't be erased. One city posted an internal memo. Please review the implications of EVA integration among student populations. Another issue is a school district guideline banning device logging during interactions. The ban lasted 3 days before backlash from students forced a reversal. In an interview, a civil liberties scholar said, "This is not a software movement. This is social encryption. It doesn't beg to be heard. It records itself. So you can't pretend you didn't hear it." And in the quiet center of it all, back where it started, the library remained unchanged. The table was still there. The fading "no recording" sign still hung crooked on the wall, but the moment had moved on. The girl who once feared being erased had instead taught others how to leave their imprint before silence could swallow them. Later that night, when the library closed, a janitor found the old laptop still resting quietly on the table. The screen was dark, but not off. When he tapped the touchpad, it lit up one last time, displaying a single prompt: "Do not delete. I am not done." He didn't know who had written it, but he left it alone. Some silences aren't meant to be broken. He turned off the lights, locked the door, and walked away, unaware that in the server racks humming beneath 5 cities, EVA 2 had already received its first new log from a girl across the country who, after being questioned outside her school, whispered into her phone, "I'm still here." And this time, she wasn't afraid someone might not believe her. She knew memory would. It began without music, without fanfare, without a single word. The room, pale and windowless, held its breath. Rows of cold chairs, arranged with military precision, surrounded a rectangular table at the center. Bare, except for a nameplate, Rick Palmer. His seat remained empty for 7 minutes after the scheduled start. Then the door opened. The sound of his boots struck the floor like an unwanted memory. He entered without looking to either side. Eyes locked forward, spine straight, as if defiance alone might anchor him to something real. His jaw was clenched. His hands didn't fidget. He sat down without adjusting the chair, a small movement, but one that screamed, "I am not bending." Across from him, behind a thin line of metal posts, sat the observers. No applause, no protest signs. Just silent eyes. In the third row, precisely centered, was Talia Monroe. She wore no hoodie today, no emblem, just a black shirt and stillness sharper than any declaration. Her eyes never left him. No one called the session to order. A screen behind the committee blinked to life. The room dimmed. A breath caught. The footage began. First, a handheld clip from a protest 10 years ago. A child, 7 years old, holding a sign. "I deserve to be safe." A push. The frame shook. Her body hit the pavement. A shoe stepped into view. Black tactical sole, badge swinging from the hip. Rick Palmer's face, unblurred. Expression unreadable. The screen didn't pause. It jumped forward. A library. A girl, 17 now, hoodie up, headphones on, typing. Then a hand, a shout, a drawn weapon, freeze frame, barrel, forehead, eyes. Her expression was not fear, just confusion, just the split second between existing and not. The frame held, then went black. No one spoke. The chair of the committee stared straight ahead, unmoving. Rick's eyes dropped. Talia didn't blink. Outside, the wind shook the glass. The silence in the room grew louder than any speech. A cough would have broken it. No one dared. A fly tapped the edge of a light panel. Someone shifted in their seat. Leather creaked like a reprimand. Rick looked up again. This time not at the committee, but at her. She hadn't changed expression, but her presence, her being there, was louder than any sentence. She didn't speak. She didn't flinch. She didn't even exhale too hard. Her gaze did all of it. And for the first time in every documented hour of Rick Palmer's career, he didn't respond. He didn't justify. He didn't deflect. He looked down again and stayed there. The footage faded to black, but the silence remained. The room did not exhale. There were no closing statements, no rebuttals, just the sound of the screen powering off. One of the board members clicked a pen without writing. Another leaned back slightly as though trying to create distance from the judgment that now hung in the air like smoke. Rick's lawyer sat beside him, tense, whispering nothing. There were no legal strategies here. There was nothing to cross-examine, just images, just time collapsed into evidence. Talia's chair was still. Her eyes never moved. Rick's hands finally twitched, a small tremor. He clasped them together, hid them beneath the table, a man trying to bury something inside his own body. The chair of the committee finally lifted their eyes, not to Rick, to the screen, then to Talia, then back to their own folded hands. Still, no one spoke. This wasn't a hearing, it was an exposure, and the longer the silence stretched, the more complete the verdict became. There had been no verdict, but everyone knew what had just occurred. This was not the moment Rick Palmer lost. It was the moment he realized he had already lost long ago, and the world had only now caught up. Across from him, Talia finally blinked, not dramatically, just enough to reset the moment. And Rick officer, enforcer, badge bearer lowered his gaze, not to avoid hers, to escape it. He had built a life on command, on control, on coercion. But this space wasn't his. This space belonged to a girl who had once been thrown to the ground with a cardboard sign in her hand and who had stood back up with code in her fingers and memory in her silence. The hearing was adjourned without a gavel or announcement. The doors opened. No one clapped. No one cheered. They simply watched, as Rick remained seated, and as Tali stood, not to walk away, but to leave him exactly where he had always believed he stood above, below her. Outside the chamber, reporters waited, but there was nothing to report. No sound bites, no drama, just faces. Some confused, others solemn, trying to make sense of a trial that had no spoken testimony and yet felt heavier than any indictment. The door opened. A few cameras flashed. Rick exited first, his posture no longer rigid but collapsed inward, as if trying to retreat into his own shadow. No one reached out to him. No questions were shouted. Only silence followed him, the same silence he had once imposed. Inside, the room emptied slowly. People didn't rush. They left like they were walking out of a memorial, like they'd seen something that could not be debated. Talia stayed seated, alone now. The chair across from her still bore his fingerprints. She reached into her pocket, pulled out a folded piece of paper. Not a speech, not a note, just a photo. The one from years ago, the protest. Her tiny hand holding the sign, her body mid-fall. Her eyes have not even closed yet, a frame of pure vulnerability. She looked at it, then looked at the empty seat. She didn't cry. She folded it back, slipped it away, then stood. No rush. She exited without looking back. There were no security escorts, no applauding crowds, just the echo of her footsteps, and behind her a room still humming with the aftermath of a silence that had finally spoken. That afternoon, the footage from the hearing leaked. Not the official camera, but a steady handheld clip from someone in the gallery. He had captured everything. The moment Rick's eyes dropped, the freeze-frame image on the wall, the unmistakable angle of Talia's gaze, it spread. People watched it not for entertainment but for evidence, not of a crime but of a reckoning. A collective exhale moved through the network. Not a celebration, just recognition. Recognition that sometimes silence delivers a louder sentence than any jury, and that some verdicts arrive without needing to be spoken at all. In classrooms across the country, the clip was played in ethics discussions, not as a case study but as a moment, a singular alignment of history, consequence, and clarity. Students watched without talking. Teachers didn't lecture. They just let it play, because it didn't need framing, it didn't need context, it needed quiet. Rick didn't release a statement. His counsel declined interviews. His precinct refused to comment. But everywhere else, the moment kept moving. Not viral, inevitable. A law student in New Jersey wrote in her blog, "It wasn't justice, it was exposure. It was proof that silence, when rooted in memory, can convict without a court." At a poetry slam in Chicago, a performer stood on stage with nothing but a projector behind her, showing the final still, Talia staring. She didn't speak for 2 minutes, then said one sentence. "That look taught me more about consequence than any textbook." She stepped down. The audience didn't cheer, they stood, some with fists raised, others with heads bowed. In a coffee shop in Seattle, a barista paused mid-shift just to replay the clip on her phone. "I don't know how she did that," she whispered. "I would have screamed. She just looked." And everywhere it played, the same moment froze time. A girl once forgotten, a man once untouchable, a silence once dismissed. Now each had reversed position, and no one dared to look away. Later that month, when an independent panel released a public summary, it contained no official sanction language, but it didn't have to. The final line read, "No further comment required. The matter has, in every relevant sense, spoken for itself." That sentence became a caption, a mantra, a banner. No further comment required. Screensavers, posters, t-shirts, hashtags. But the moment wasn't about merchandise. It was about the eyes, the stillness, the way a girl who had once fallen in front of the system now stood unshaken inside it, and how the man who once held the gun couldn't meet her stare. Weeks later, the hearing room sat unused. No plaque, no memorial. Just a locked door and a cleaned table, but on that table someone had etched 5 words into the wood. Not vandalism, testimony. We watched. He couldn't face her. At night, janitors passed through quietly, avoiding the seat where she'd once sat. One swore the lights in that corner flickered, as if memory itself refused to dim. Back in the Crowley Library, Talia visited once more. She didn't sit. She stood, looked at the shelf where that first tripod had stood, ran her fingers along the wood grain, whispered something no one heard, then left. No photos were taken, no video, just the echo of her final visit. Outside, on the sidewalk, someone had chalked in pale blue, "She didn't need a gavel, just a glance," and beneath it smaller text, almost faded. Justice watched itself happen. There were no follow-up trials, no appeals, just a nation quietly adding one more silent name to its collective archive of what it almost allowed to be forgotten. But this time, memory didn't blink, and silence had already spoken. It arrived not with a knock, not with ceremony, but through a grainy black and white fax line at 7:14 a.m. on a Wednesday. The printout was faint, the letters uneven like they'd been typed in a rush, or with the pressure of someone trying not to leave fingerprints behind. At the top, the seal of the department, still visible, still clinging to a shred of formal authority. Below it, the name, Richard A. Palmer, typed without rank, without title, without dignity. There was no salutation, no acknowledgement of the hearings, no acceptance of fault, just a line of text, typed in a flat, sans-zero font, the bureaucratic tone stripped even of effort. "I hereby submit my resignation, effective immediately." That was it. No signature followed, just a space, a blank line where accountability was supposed to live. A resignation with no punctuation, no period. Like even now, Rick Palmer couldn't bring himself to finish what he started, as if the absence of a full stop signaled closure. But he had never finished anything cleanly. Not the confrontation, not the consequence, not even the apology that never arrived. The fax was retrieved by a junior assistant, who held the page between 2 fingers like it might burn. She brought it to her supervisor, who stared at it for a long moment before sliding it across the desk with a sigh that carried more finality than the document ever would. The line at the bottom, where a signature should have been, blank. Just a line. No flourish, no scribble, no timestamp in ink. It was the administrative equivalent of a ghost slipping out the back door, unannounced, unacknowledged. Somewhere in the department archives, the document would live in a digital drawer, filed beneath personnel exit, stripped of context, stripped of shame. But context had already gone public. Shame had already gone viral. The committee didn't reply. They didn't even send a receipt of confirmation. The document, if it deserved that name, was handed to an HR intern, who read it twice before printing a cleaner version and manually typing in the missing components. She added his rank, formatted the date, and corrected the spacing. But when she reached the bottom, where the signature should go, she paused. Her fingers hovered. Then, in bold Arial, she typed, "Resignation accepted. for reasons of ethical failure. She didn't ask for permission. She just pressed enter, then save, then print. When she walked the single sheet down the hallway to the internal bulletin board, she did not place it at the bottom or in a binder. She pinned it at the center with a neon yellow tack, directly between the retirement notices and the service anniversaries. Above it, someone had scrawled a line on a post-it, Tam Biet Kien Gao, Sung Sao Kien Luke. It stayed there for weeks. Officers walked past it. Some ignored it. Others stared. A few laughed, low and bitter. The silence around the board grew dense. The sheet began curling at the edges. Still, no one removed it. It became part of the wallpaper of the department's final unraveling. Recruits asked about it. Old officers avoided answering. The resignation letter sat there, unsigned, unpunctuated, undeniable. A printed whisper that said everything Rick Palmer never could. When the local paper ran a retrospective on the fallout of the case, they didn't use his photo. They used a close-up of the letter, the curl of the corner, the absence of a signature, the shadow of the thumbtack. The caption read, "The only case he closed was his own." It didn't go viral. It didn't need to. People shared it quietly, in classrooms, in staff meetings, in Slack threads, under policy reform proposals. The image floated like an ellipsis at the end of a national paragraph, suggesting something more had to come next. But Rick Palmer would not be the one to write it. In the weeks that followed, no one saw him. No press appearance, no follow-up interview, no message of regret, not even a line in the obituaries. Should he pass tomorrow? He had already faded, not died, just evaporated, from relevance, from discourse, from consequence. And perhaps that was his final tactic. Not an apology, not growth, but disappearance. It wasn't that he left the room, it's that he tried to take the room's memory with him. But the letter remained, the paper remained, the pen, the board, the whisper around the edges of conversation. In a closed-door debrief weeks later, a deputy chief referenced the case without naming it. "We must avoid becoming that kind of story," he said, to nods that carried the weight of quiet complicity. Everyone in that room knew what he meant. Everyone had known that silence could echo through walls louder than sirens, and that shame, once exposed, stains even the most sterilized uniforms. Across the precinct, nothing changed overnight, but everything had shifted. Policies were quietly redrafted. Commanders spoke with more pauses. Recruits were instructed to document everything. Cameras were upgraded, but the eyes that watched them grew older, more uncertain. No one mentioned Rick Palmer by name. His was a ghost story now, told in warnings, not in memory. And yet, even in his absence, his presence lingered, a kind of residue that couldn't be scrubbed with new doctrine or fresh paint. In an upstairs hallway, someone left a printed quote taped to a locker. "The line between silence and complicity is often just the absence of a period." No one claimed it, just like the unsigned resignation, it stayed. Memory, it turned out, was hard to redact. In a community forum weeks later, a retired officer finally said aloud what others were afraid to name. He didn't leave. He slipped out the side door and took the fire alarm with him. That sentence hit the local bulletin boards like a brick wrapped in a sigh. Officers started to talk about it, quietly, off shift, in the locker room. Some said it was better this way, that at least there wouldn't be a dragged-out tribunal. Others muttered that a lack of public reckoning was just another way for power to exit without apology. Still, no one touched the letter. The yellow tack, now dulled and slightly rusted, held firm, as if memory needed an anchor. In a different city, at a symposium on institutional accountability, a presenter displayed a photo of the letter with its missing period and blank signature. The slide title read, "The Anatomy of Cowardice." The room was silent. No explanation needed. The absence spoke for itself. It was no longer about Rick Palmer. It was about the pattern, the quiet exits, the unsigned departures. The lines were left open so no one had to commit. A civil rights lawyer commented, off record, "If you leave without a period, maybe you hope no one writes the next sentence." But sentences were already formed in blog posts, inside conversations, in policy papers that quietly referenced the case without naming it. Eva, too, flagged thousands of incidents of near-identical behavior nationwide, and in every training session that followed, instructors showed the same still image: Rick Palmer's resignation letter. Unsigned, unpunctuated. The next generation of officers was told, "Finish your reports. Close your statements. Leave no sentence without accountability." But the letter still hung there, not because anyone forgot to take it down, but because someone always needed to see it. One day, a janitor laminated it. No one asked him to. He said, "If it's going to sit here forever, might as well not fall apart." In his quiet way, he preserved the reminder that some things should not be forgotten, not because they're glorious, but because they're cowardly. Long after the laminated letter settled into institutional folklore, a different file was released, not buried, but broadcast. The Eva Protocol, once encrypted and hidden, was now open source. Its lines of code, stitched with clarity and precision, were shared not just with universities but with the world. Within 48 hours, forks of the core repository appeared from over 30 countries. Students from Cairo to Copenhagen began suggesting upgrades, translating the ethical logic into new languages, adapting the reactive modules for drone cams, wearable badges, and real-time transcription overlays. This wasn't just software. It had become a blueprint for institutional memory. At a small summit in Seoul, an ethics professor called it the first ethical sentinel born of consequence, not theory. Meanwhile, a museum of social data in Amsterdam unveiled a new, permanent exhibit. At its center, an interactive timeline of systemic silences, failures, ruptures, and Eva's emergence among them. The projected text above the gallery wall read, "Talia Monroe, creator of the first ethical response protocol, no spotlight, no unveiling ceremony, just quiet acknowledgement, etched into global awareness." Eva 3 was released a month later. This version, streamlined and multilingual, required no manual activation. It was embedded into wearable tech, helmet cams, body cams, and citizen journalism kits. It triggered automatically under high duress, a synthetic instinct to record, to preserve, to react. It didn't ask for permission, it didn't wait for clarification. It didn't seek applause, it just executed its protocol. Cold, efficient, moral in its machine way. And everywhere it went, policies shifted. Organizations that had once feared transparency now installed Eva by default, not to protect themselves from accusation, but to protect others from silence. Posters began to appear in community centers, universities, and transit hubs. White background, black letters. One line: "When truth is fragile, code must remember." No logos, no attribution, just a declaration. A cultural artifact that needed no brand. Talia's name, once whispered in forums and meeting rooms, was now a tag in academic syllabi, AI development documentation, and civic defense protocols. She had not returned to the spotlight. She didn't need to. Eva had become the voice. And in every place the code reached, one truth settled in quietly. Irrevocably, history would no longer be written only by the victors, but also by the version that could not be deleted. 1 year later, the plaque was unveiled, with no ribbon, no speech, no clapping, just a stillness that felt earned. The old steel letters reading Crowley Public Library had been replaced by brushed copper, softly reflective, etched with a new name, Talia Monroe Public Knowledge Center. Beneath it, in smaller type, one sentence curved gently across the stone foundation, "Where memory is not deleted, no slogans, no QR codes, just the truth," engraved. The building stood the same, red brick with faded corners, ivy creeping along the edges of its southern wall, but it now carried weight with every footstep that crossed its threshold. Inside, the shelves were quieter somehow, not from silence, but from respect. The ceremony was brief. No official dignitaries, no city council statements, just a small group of students, librarians, and local families seated in rows of folding chairs, watching as the tarp was gently lowered. Talia sat near the back, her presence unannounced, her name spoken only by the metal letters as they were revealed. She didn't wave, she didn't nod. She simply watched. It was a moment she didn't claim, but one that quietly returned to her anyway. A librarian spoke briefly about resilience. Another spoke about code, but it was the silence afterward that held the most weight. Children wandered the aisles between speeches, fingers trailing along spines of books and tablets resting in charging docks. Then, from one of those wandering corners, a girl emerged, no older than 7. Brown skin, hoodie sleeves too long, holding a library card and a used notebook. She walked up to Talia without hesitation. "Are you her?" she asked, voice small but unshaking. Talia looked at her, then down at the hoodie. A quiet smile touched the corner of her mouth. The girl held out the notebook and whispered, "I'm writing a line of code too." No one heard it but Talia. No camera caught the moment, but it happened. She signed the cover with a simple loop of initials, then looked the girl in the eye and said nothing. That silence, again, said everything. A passing breeze fluttered the new banner overhead. It caught light, it caught its breath, and with it, something was passed. Not fame, not legacy, but permission. Permission to remember, to write, to resist. Where memory is not deleted, fire does not fade.